Okay, so welcome Professor Ross Balzaretti, Professor of Italian History at the University of Nottingham in the Department of History. I wonder if we might begin by you telling us something about your research in general.
I sort of started out as an early medievalist, and then I remained as an early medievalist. Well, I still am, of course. I'm quite well known, luckily for me now. I don't publish as much in that area as I used to, although my next big project actually is in that area, so we'll talk about that later. But I sort of shifted, and I shifted partly for two reasons. One, I couldn't really persuade undergraduate students to study that topic. And two, if we're thinking about research and PhD students, I couldn't seem to recruit at that point, subsequently I did, at that point, many students who were interested in that sort of time period and those sorts of topics. So I shifted a bit, and I started teaching stuff about the history of travel from Britain to Italy in the from the 16th century onwards, but I ended up focusing on the lengthy period in the 19th century, really.
Really interesting, but a very wide range of research interests.
Yes, too wide.
Right.
Piece of advice for future for researchers: start out doing a very specific, definite bit.
Focus. Yes.
Expand if you want to, but realise that can be slightly challenging.
Yes, it's daunting. Yes, I think part of what you're describing there is this book, the Rediscovering Lost Landscapes from 2021, and that's an important book. And can you perhaps explain how that changed the way we look at this particular topic?
Absolutely. Well, it's what it is. I'll just explain what it is first of all, and what happened. So, it is the result of a £150,000 research grant from the Leverhulme Trust. So, it is a result of a grant application. Yeah. It was written jointly by me, by Charles Watkins, who's Professor in Geography here at Nottingham, and we've worked together for decades on this field work in parts of eastern Liguria, so on the Mediterranean. We had a PhD student called Pietro Piana, and he did a really good PhD a few years ago, and we wrote him into this grant, and so he became the principal researcher, and we produced the book together. So all our names are on the book here, and we did the research together. One geographer, one historian, and one person who brings the two together, which is Pietro. And how this came about is another really interesting story, actually, because Charles was in a commercial art gallery in London, looking around, and suddenly saw on the wall a picture of somewhere in Liguria that he recognised. And it was actually done by the woman who did this, Elizabeth Fanshawe, right, in the 1820s, who went on a grand tour of Italy. And Charles bought it because he liked it. And he said to the gallery owner, "Have you got any more of these?" Yeah, there was a whole pile of them. Oh, wow. And gradually, us and other people bought them. They weren't that expensive. And we wrote a paper about it with Pietro. We discovered that you can actually use art in a way that art historians do not use it. One of the things that historians do a lot of is using different types of documents and comparing them together to try and get some sort of truth, which is not possible really, but one can try. Yes. So say you've got this view here, right, which is a view of a fairly nondescript view of a valley in the north of Italy, the Val di Scrivia, so it's north of Genoa. But it has certain characteristics which are really important. It is precisely dated to the day, so you know what season it was done in. Now, if you go, we all know, if we look out that window, right, those trees are deciduous, so in the winter it looks completely different to in the summer. This is the case all over the place, right? So seasonality in art is really an interesting topic. Wow. Right. Then you can go and try and find that view, which is what Pietro, Charles and me did. We spent a year on and off going to all these places, trying to find the views now and seeing how the landscape was different or similar. And it was usually very different. So then you can use these images to, if you put them in chronological sequences by different artists for the same place, you can see how they represented change. Then you can compare with maps, different periods. You can compare with physical evidence. You can talk to people, living people. You end up with quite a detailed, specific study of a series of, not just Liguria, but parts of Piemonte, so the Aosta Valley as well. You've got a comparative study within a relatively small space, which demonstrates that the methodology is possible.
really, really interesting. And I think what this points to, and perhaps you could speak a bit about that, is the real world relevance of research like this, or historical research more generally.
Traditionally, historians go to archives, they read the documents, they talk to archivists, and they know archivists quite well. Those archivists are very skilled. They can help read the documents, they can help interpret the documents. You don't normally necessarily or indeed need to interact with any other sort of person to write history.
True.
However, it depends on what sort of history you want to write. So again, traditionally historians might talk to literature experts if they want to interpret why a text is written in a particular way or what register it's written or whatever. But you can also contribute, you can collaborate, and I've done a lot of that over the last 20 years, with people in other disciplines.
Yeah.
If you're interested in the history of wolves,
Yeah.
which is a really good topic, because they're what they call an indicator species of the relatively natural type of environment that survives or provided for them, because they won't live in very managed environments. And this material, sometimes you get pictures of wolves in the landscape, or things they eat like hares, and they're represented. So, and they disappeared. So from the middle of the 19th century, they disappeared and they've been reintroduced.
Yeah.
The reason they can be successfully reintroduced is the landscape has changed. So all the degradation of the landscape can be quite positive for wildlife, not so much for people, actually. And so this sort of thing does contribute to public debate in that area, that region. Yeah. In that part of Italy, the regional government has a lot of power. Yeah. And we have been interviewed, and there have been newspaper stuff, and Pietro in particular. So Pietro Piana now works in Genoa, not in geography, but in politics, I think, a crossover anyway, I can't remember. But he does a lot of work on flooding. So he's a sort of historical consultant person. Wow. So he looks at the maps, for example, which will show you very precisely where the course of the river has or hasn't changed. Yeah. So there are lots of potential spin-offs for this.
So this is both interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, but also I think speaks very much to understanding the past in order to understand the landscape and environment that we live in now.
Yes.
I think that's really interesting. I think it's a really important point about history.
Well, everything's connected.
Everything is history, yes.
Really.
Really interesting. So can you say anything about what you're working on at the moment?
I can. I'm sort of in between.
Okay.
I have begun to conceptualise a new project which is related to art, and in fact derives from this object, which I bought at an auction a few years ago, which is a collection of a sketchbook. It's a sketchbook by a local Nottingham artist, and this is just for Richard's benefit. You can see, for example, there, which is a sketch, just show it to the camera, a sketch of people in the fields harvesting with Nottingham in the background. And it's dated to, let me do this, September the 14th, 1827. Wow. Very late to be harvesting wheat.
Yes.
Extremely, 2 months later than now.
Yeah, definitely.
How interesting.
Yeah.
That does tell you something about climate. What I want to do is a study using the methods in that book to look at Nottinghamshire and artistic production in the Victorian period and what it tells us about Nottingham landscape. Most of the artwork in that book was done by amateur artists, not by professionals, and we deliberately chose that because professionals change everything for artistic effect. Right. Amateurs are not capable of doing that very well, and they don't follow artistic fashion. Yeah. They can be very good, or they can easily be as good as professionals in terms of what they represent, but they tend to be much more narrowly representative. That's the main thing which I'm probably going to put in for public research money at some point. I'm also finishing off an early medieval thing which I've been doing since 1993, another thing not to recommend to PhD students. Yes. But I say doing since 1993, only in short bursts, which is a translation of a major Latin text, Paul the Deacon's History of the Lombards. Yes. Why is it important? Because without that text we would know nothing about 400 years of Italian history at all, pretty much.
I mean, really interesting, but also a very broad, that's why, in a sense, you're a professor of Italian history, because you have this broad understanding.
That's why I chose that title.
Exactly, exactly. Really, really interesting. So this leads on, I think, to future research in terms of PhDs. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit about either PhDs, you've already mentioned some, that you have supervised, or potential topics that you think might be suitable for supervision with you.
So heritage, I think, is quite a good area for potential history students of PhDs to be involved in. Yeah. I'm quite interested in pursuing this art angle as a methodology with potential PhD students. But what I still know most about, and it's not what I've taught most about, but what I know most about is the early medieval stuff. And I'm more than happy to supervise stuff on gender issues, which both of us have done at different periods. History of sexuality, history of landscape in particular. Yeah. I think increasingly funders of PhDs like people to be quite interdisciplinary.
Yes, I think that's right.
So one piece of advice I would give to potential history PhDs is don't just think in terms of narrowly conventional historical work. Yeah. You can do that, and some people will get funding for that, but you might be more likely to get the funding if you can straddle a bit outside of the discipline with another discipline or collaborate. Yeah. Certainly post-PhD, that's really very important, I think.
Really, really interesting. Thank you very much, Professor Ross Balzaretti.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you.